This third unit and last unit of the class, we've been taking a look at propaganda of our day. We started the class taking a look at what propaganda is and what is art, and we examined some cultures and how they use propaganda to get people to think a certain way and to envision the world in a very similar way that we see happening within the film Inception, which I had you watch at the beginning of the semester, shaping their perception, shaping their thoughts. What we see as we get towards the end of the semester, what I wanted you to be able to think about was how do we see propaganda working in our world today? Sometimes we tend to think that propaganda doesn't work on me. It doesn't shape the way that I see the world. I'm an independent thinker, and I have my own agency to to think about the world in my own way. However, we can't necessarily be impervious to propaganda. It's all around us. It shapes our thoughts. It shapes how we think, how we perceive the world. And we've been examining different elements to this as we concluded our unit on race, how some of the residual elements of how we perceive race might be lingering in our contemporary world. We examined womanhood and how some of the residual elements of gender and some of the problems of how we see gender continue on as we try to find our identity and what that means. I wanted to take a look at a couple more elements of propaganda in our world today and how this influences the way that we see the world. And a couple elements that we're going to take a look at today are that idea of environmentalism and consumerism and how these ideas go hand in hand. And some students really struggle with this particular concept because as we go through and I start to peel back some of the ideas of how propaganda works in our world today, I tend to get some pushback from people who say, well, that's not propaganda, that's just the way the world is, right? That's just the way it's supposed to be. And then, you have to pause and think, well, is it, or is that just how propaganda is working within us, right? So we'll take a look at um, environmentalism and consumerism and how it's influencing and shaping the world that we see today. And then we're going to end the semester by taking a look at religion and particularly religious extremism and how this is going to be the problems that we're going to be facing. And so these last couple of units that we're going to end the semester with are more of me thinking about what are going to be the issues that you're going to be seeing propaganda influence the world for the next 20, 30 years beyond, right? So what are the major issues that are going to come into play? As we get going, taking a look at the ideas that I wanted to talk about today, I want you to think about just a scenario, right? Just to kind of introduce a topic to you. I want you to think about that you have been diagnosed with a rare heart condition and have less than 2 years to live. The cardiologist tells you that this condition can be corrected with surgery. However, you want to be thorough with this. You want a second opinion. So you go to see another cardiologist. She gives you the same diagnosis. Unconvinced because you have unlimited time and resources, right? You want to make sure that you get this right. I guess just imagine yourself being a little bit obsessive about this. You visit the top 100 cardiologists in the world. Of these 100 doctors, 97 give you the same diagnosis. Without surgery, you will not live very long. And so the question I want you to think about within this scenario is, what do, right? Do you get the surgery, or do you say, yeah, I'm going to go with the three that said, nah, I should be fine, right? So, I think most of us, when we are confronted with a scenario similar to this, we would go with the 97 doctors. And there's always, one or two rascals that say, you know what, I'm going to go with the three, and I don't know if they're trying to be funny or just trying to be difficult, whatever the case may be. There's always a couple that say, no, I'm not gonna go that route, and that's, bless their hearts. That's fine. But I think the most of us would choose to go with the 97. And thinking about that, another question to consider would be, would you consider 97 out of 100 doctors to be an open debate, or would you consider that to be a consensus? As you consider that question, again, most of us would say that 97 out of 100 doctors would be a consensus. That would be pretty much as uniform as you can get on any particular item. With that, let's relate that to environmentalism. 97% of scientists agree that climate change is happening and humans are causing it. So as we think about that, the propaganda that we see today is that there is a debate, an ongoing debate. Scientists can't agree on whether climate change is real or whether it's happening. And the fact of the matter is, at least according to NASA, 97% of scientists agree that global warming is happening and that it's by and large caused by human behaviors. And the answer is it's propaganda, right? The propaganda says that there is a debate on the issue of climate change. And so then the question is, where does that come from, right? Where does that mindset come from? And mainly it comes from the oil companies. The oil companies, according to an Exxon study, right, they did in 1977, they did their independent study to see whether climate change was real or not. And what they concluded was that climate change was happening due to carbon emissions. And so even Exxon, an oil company that profits from carbon emissions, did their own independent study, and that study came back and said actually global warming climate change is happening and humans are causing it. So then the question that they're confronted with is, what do we do with this information? Do we reveal this information to the general public and say, hey, this is what we need to do? This is causing, problems, and it's going to even get worse down the road. Or do we repress the information and deny that it happens, right? So as you're thinking about what do corporations try to do? They try to maximize their profits, and so this would not be something that would be beneficial for the oil companies. So what they decided to do is they tried to repress the information, and so they spent $36 million over the last 20 years to try to deny climate change. And mainly not only to try to deny it, but then also the other component to this is that they have suggested that there's debate, right? So not there. That's kind of a two-prong approach. Either it doesn't exist, or if it does exist, maybe scientists aren't necessarily 100% sure on what's happening with it. The two individuals that are mainly responsible for funding the climate change denial is the Koch brothers, Charles and David Koch, who are heavily steeped within the oil companies, right? They've spent over $127 million over the last 20 years to deny climate change. And so again, there's a lot of big money out there that's trying to push against and trying to promote this propaganda that the climate change is a hoax, or it's uncertain. We're not really clear on it. When it gets down to it, if you ask most scientists in the field who are autonomously funded, or even to the extent of some of them that are funded by the oil companies, they're coming back with the same idea that carbon emissions is a huge problem that's causing climate change. Thinking about this, just a couple of graphs here. One of them, you see the amount of carbon emissions on a global level, and that continuing to increase with with the increased amount of cars that are in the industry. Then you see on the other side the rise in temperatures of the planet, right? CO2 levels versus temperatures, and there is a correlation there, right? And so we have to think about what does that mean, and what are we to do about it. Another scenario that I want you to think about is the following. As we think about environmentalism and what do we do now, a lot of times when we take a look at these ideas, it can be kind of depressing. And I don't want to be doom and gloom, right? There are things that we can do, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But just to kind of pull back a little bit and just think about something a little bit different, right? I think about this as a case study that the 40 or so of us as a class, I guess we would have to do this pre-quarantine. The 40 of us or so are in a lifeboat. Our boat has a carrying capacity of 50, right? So we're out in the middle of the ocean. We're on a lifeboat. We're trying to get to safety, right? We have a carrying capacity of 50, so we have room for 10 more people. You look off into the distance and see 100 people out and stranded in the middle of the ocean without a lifeboat, and they're swimming towards our boat. The question is, what should we do, right? Should we, A, choose to let 10 people get on the boat, let all 100 people onto the boat, let no one onto the boat, or give up your seat so another person can have your place? And so just pause the video for a second, think about what you would actually do, and we'll come back and talk about it. Just to, before you pause it, a couple of points of clarification. These are the only four options that you have. You can't invent your own option. I have a lot of times people are trying to come up with, option E or something like that, which is, well, come up with shifts where people are going to be swimming and then some people are going to be on the boat. And that's not the way this scenario works, right? This scenario works with these four options, and the question is, what do you do with it? All right, as we come back here, a lot of times as I throw this study out for classes to debate, and we would, if we were meeting face to face, we would be talking about this in class in smaller groups, and we'd come back and talk about it as a full class. But as I've noticed, as we've talked about, as people have really grappled with this, one thing that they try to resist is they don't want to really deal with the morality of it, right? That's why they come up with different scenarios. Well, I'm going to, have people come up with some type of elaborate schedule where, because the idea is that they don't really want to be in charge of causing anyone to die, right? And that's understandable. But the idea of this particular case study is that you have to deal with very difficult moral decisions, right? And each one of these decisions that you choose is going to have its own drawbacks. And I think that's another reason why people push against this particular case study. They try to find a different solution, right? So, because you can, for choice A, right? Choice A sounds good. You have 10 seats available, and you have the ability to save 10 people, right? So then you choose 10 people to get on the boat, but then the moral question becomes, what 10 do you choose to get on the boat? How do you determine this, right? Do you go by age? Do you go by, gender? Do you go by, some other kind of quality? What do you, the first come, first serve? Who gets to get onto the boat, right? Do you choose the people that are going to be the strongest and the best rowers? Or do you choose the weakest among them that need greater help? But essentially, the problem with this, with choice A, is you're choosing 10 people to live, and then you're also choosing 90 people to die, right? So that tends to be a moral kind of struggle within this. The choice B, it sounds tempting as well, letting all 100 people on there, which gives a certain sense of equality. This idea of, well, I don't want to choose. I don't want to have that moral choice of which 10 people I'm going to save and which 90 people I'm not. So it allows that equality. It alleviates people from that difficult moral choice. But again, it has its own drawbacks because you're letting all 100 people onto a boat that has a capacity of 50. The boat's going to sink. And so everyone is equal and everyone dies equally, right? So it's another difficult moral choice. And so then you have to grapple with the fact that you could have saved 50 people and then you didn't, right? You didn't kill, you killed 150 rather than saving 50. And so that does become a bit of a moral problem as well. Choice C, again, it does sound a little bit tempting to some because they say, hey, I don't want to be that person that chooses the 10 people to get on the boat, right? I'd rather not participate within that, so I'm going to allow no one on the boat. But again, the moral choice with that is that you had room for 10 people and you chose not to save those 10 people, right? So again, that has that difficult moral consequence to it. And then D, I find that what I find interesting is that as I teach this over the years, I have more and more people that are choosing D, and I'm fascinated by that rationale. That they're willing to give up their seat so that another can have a place. And although that sounds like the moral choice to do, right? There's the idea of self-sacrifice. You jump off the boat and then you allow someone else to have your seat. Sounds very heroic, but in a sense, it doesn't solve the problem. You have just simply said, you kind of kicked the can down the road and you've said, I'm going to die instead of someone else, right? And so it still has that moral complexity to it where there's still choice going on. And what I've found is as I've pushed people on this, and it's very fascinating. What they argue is they would rather give up their seat. And it wasn't because of heroism or bravery or courage or anything like that. They said, I would rather not make the moral choice. It's better for me to just go off into the ocean and drown so I don't have to have the guilt of knowing that, between 90 and 100 people died because of a choice that I made. And I think that that's a fascinating idea. But again, it's just the idea of washing your hands from difficult moral choices, which we can't do, right? So thinking about this in terms of environmentalism, right? This hypothetical example deals with people who are living on a finite planet, much like environmentalism, right? These people have on the boat have finite resources that are in a fixed space. Similarly, if we think about this in terms of environmentalism, environmentalism deals with people living on a finite planet, right? That's our kind of ship out in the middle of the ocean of space when we have a fixed amount of resources. And so the question is, how should we fix the problems that are presented with us? We're going to have some very difficult moral choices over the next 20 to 30 years. And there's not really going to be any easy answers. If we think that there's going to be easy answers, there's not, right? There's going to be some very difficult moral choices. And so as we think about this, I wanted to go back to 4th Nephi. I know we talked about this before, but I think it does add some interesting insights into how to deal with this moving forward. 4th Nephi says, and they had all things in common among them. Therefore, they were not rich and poor, bond and free, but they were all made free and partakers of the heavenly gift. And it came to pass that there was no contention in the land because of the love of God which did dwell in the hearts of the people. And there were no envyings, nor strifes, nor tumults, nor whoredoms, nor lying, nor murders, nor any manner of lasciviousness. And surely there could not be a happier people among all the people who had been created by the hand of God. And there were no robbers, no murderers, neither were there any Lamanites, nor any manner of ites, but they were one, in one, the children of Christ, heirs to the heavenly kingdom. And so as we stop there for a second, we have this moment of happiness and peace within the Book of Mormon, which there are only a few moments throughout the entire Book of Mormon where you have this. And thinking about why that is. Why do people have this state of happiness? And perhaps it's because they had all things in common, right? Rather than this social hierarchy, rather than this idea of otherness, thinking about how I can be superior to other people, there was this level, this desire to be equal. And so maybe part of the propaganda as we move forward is we need to start seeing people as equal rather than as inferior. So that might be a key component to this to keep in mind. We've talked about this when we're talking about racism, and talked a little bit about this when we're talking about gender issues that we're currently struggling with. And then just look what happens just a few verses later in the same chapter. And now this 201st year there began to be among them those who were lifted up in pride, such as the wearing of costly apparel and all manner of pearls and fine things of the world. And from that time forth they did have their goods and their substance no more common among them. And they began to be divided into classes, and they began to build up churches unto themselves to get gain. And they began to deny the true church of Christ. So if we think about the Book of Mormon as written for our day, What is the message of the Book of Mormon? What's the main lesson to learn? Why is it that there was this major catastrophic genocide at the end of the Book of Mormon that led to the end of the Nephites? What was it that really separated them, and what are we to learn from this? Maybe part of this is to learn that we, definitely to have a greater faith in Christ and a greater desire to be like Him and to have Him influencing our decisions. And the other part of that, right, part of becoming a Christian is to have things in common, not to feel superior and not to look at others as inferior and not to be lifted up in pride, right? That's one of the lessons of the Book of Mormon is the pride cycle. And part of this is to not focus so much on material possessions. And so we're going to take a look at consumerism and how this relates to this idea of environmentalism, how these are kind of this two-prong approach to propaganda that we see within our world that's shaping our vision, shaping the way that we see it. Thinking about consumer culture, what happened, where did it come from? It really begins in the aftermath of the Great Depression. It begins in the aftermath of World War II. And the whole idea is as people ended the war, we didn't want to lapse back into the old habits of the Great Depression and not wanting to spend money, right? Because the idea of the Great Depression is you can't go to the bank, you can't put your money in a savings account because the bank could close and you would lose your money. You don't really want to invest in a lot of stocks or bonds. You don't really want to invest in shopping because you don't know if the market's going to crash again. And so you want to save money. So what they had to do is they had to develop this propaganda mill to get people spending their money. And this quote takes a look at that. During the Great Depression in the 1930s, public officials were alarmed at the decline in consumer spending and called on good Americans to buy consumer goods in order to revive the economy. This was the first connection between citizenship and consumerism. During World War II, the message was reversed. Sacrifice, save, and don't expect to spend on consumer goods. I should say goods there. The government needs to spend the available money. After the war, the big fear of economists and government leaders was that Americans would not spend their higher wages on wages they were earning. The government responded by subsidizing mortgages and encouraging the housing boom and suburbs, which we talked about in earlier in previous classes. Business responded with malls and other shopping opportunities away from the cities. What Cohen calls the consumer republic was born with an ever-growing hold on the mindset of American life. And so the main focus of propaganda was to try to get people shopping so that they didn't spend. And the idea for this was we need the mechanism of industry going if we're going to have jobs, if we're going to have people that are going to have an income. We need people spending money to keep that mechanism going, and so that was the big demand. And so this one kind of drives that point home. Our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and use of goods into rituals. And I want you to think about whether this applies to our world today. That we make our spiritual satisfactions our ego satisfactions in consumption, right? So do we feel spiritually satisfied as a society when we consume? Do we feel ego, right? This kind of the sense of self-pride as we buy things. The measure of social status, of social acceptance, of prestige is now to be found in our consumptive patterns. The very meaning and significance of our lives today expressed in consumptive terms. The greater the pressure upon the individual to conform to safe and accepted social standards, the more does he tend to express his aspirations and his individuality in terms of what he wears, drives, eats, his home, his car, his pattern of food serving, his hobbies. And so the idea is to develop social norms based around consuming, based around shopping. And the more that we can put pressure on people to see that their aspirations should be rooted in consumption, the more that the industry of consumerism will continue on, the more that products we will buy, right? That's the mindset. These commodities and services must be offered to the consumer with a special urgency. Think about the latest iPhone or the latest gadget or whatever the case may be. We need things consumed, burned up, worn out, replaced, and discarded at an ever-increasing pace. We need to have people eat, drink, dress, ride, live with ever more complicated and therefore constantly more expressive, expensive consumption. And so what we see here is that we need this idea that the pressure, the social mindset, the social construction, the propaganda was to get people to buy, right? And we see that expressed in our media. We see that expressed in our daily life. This one's just a preview of a film that really helps to drive this idea home.
When I was 7, most of my friends stopped believing in magic. That's when I first started. They were beautiful. They were happy. They didn't even need any money. They had magic cards. Rebecca Bloomwood. Dress, Zach Posen. Belt, Todd Oldham Vintage. Bag, Gucci. You know that thing when you see someone cute and he smiles and your heart kind of goes like warm butter sliding down hot toast? Well, that's what it's like when I see a store. Declined. Can you try again? Really declined.
How are you gonna pay this debt?
I know I've made some mistakes, but I'm turning my life around.
Fluent in Finnish?
Everyone pads their resume a little.
Sorry. You took a job at a savings magazine. Don't you think that's kind of ironic that Rebecca Bloomwood is advising people on how to handle money? Gucci boots!
I saw him first.
Give them to me! Bex, you can do this. You just need to figure out what you write about.
Shoes.
Describing investment in the way that women purchase different shoes, that was very clever.
This is a very important magazine. Is this where you should be?
Do not open that closet!
What I really need is a black Vanice shoe in the size 10.
You speak Prada?
Rebecca's pretty unique. She's vivacious, inspiring, funny. She's hard to ignore.
Where is it? Where's that credit card?
Confessions of a Shopaholic.
I remember from your resume that you speak Finnish. There's someone very excited to meet you. Jani.
Ah, hei hei.
Hey.
Onpa hauskaa tavata toinen suomalainen täällä. Siitä lähtien, kun mä oon täällä Amerikassa.
Men like you are the reason I left Finland. Hello?
So it's a silly movie, and I don't know why the audio wasn't working very well on that, but it's a silly movie, and in some ways it's teasing our consumptive patterns, right? This idea of basing our lives and our social status on what we buy. But in some ways it's also promoting that idea that this is kind of a fun way to live your life in that sense. How does this influence art, thinking about the propaganda and how propaganda shapes perception, and then how art reflects this? You have pop art with Andy Warhol. He said the following: making money is art, working is art, and good business is the best art. And so what we see as he's responding to these ideas in the 1960s is that art should reflect our consumptive patterns. It should be about what we're able to buy, and because that's really what matters to us, right? So he's reflecting what the social values, the social norms. I want to take a look at Anne Leonard's here, her history or her story of stuff. She takes a look at our consumptive patterns and examines what's going on with them, and gives us kind of an interesting insight into this wheel of consumption.
We have less than 4% of our original forests left. 40% of the waterways have become undrinkable. And our problem is not just that we're using too much stuff, but we're using more than our share. We have 5% of the world's population, but we're using 30% of the world's resources and creating 30% of the world's waste. If everybody consumed at US rates, we would need 3 to 5 planets. And you know what? We've only got 1. So my country's response to this limitation is simply to go take somebody else's. This is the third world, which some would say is another word for our stuff that somehow got on somebody else's land. So what does that look like? The same thing, trashing the place. 75% of global fisheries now are fished at or beyond capacity. 80% of the planet's original forests are gone. In the Amazon alone, we're losing 2,000 trees a minute. That is 7 football fields a minute. The increasing asthma and cancer rates, kids in the Congo paid with their future. 30% of the kids in part of the Congo have dropped out of school to mine coltan, a metal we need for our cheap and disposable electronics. These people even paid by having to cover their own health insurance. All along this system, people pitched in so I could get this radio for $4.99. And none of these contributions are recorded in any accounts book. That's what I mean by the company owners externalize the true costs of production. And that brings us to the golden arrow of consumption. This is the heart of the system, the engine that drives it. It is so important that protecting this arrow has become the top priority for both of these guys. That's why after 9/11, when our country was in shock, and President Bush could have suggested any number of appropriate things, to grieve, to pray, to hope. No, he said to shop, to shop. We have become a nation of consumers. Our primary identity has become that of being consumers, not mothers, teachers, farmers, but consumers. The primary way that our value is measured and demonstrated is by how much we contribute to this arrow, how much we consume. And do we? We shop and shop and shop, keep the materials flowing, and flow they do. Guess what percentage of total materials flow through this system is still in product or use 6 months after their date of sale in North America?
So stopping there, I want you to think about that. What percentage of what we buy is actually in use 6 months later, all right? So think about that. What percentage would you ascribe to that?
50%? 20? No, 1%. 1. In other words, 99% of the stuff we harvest, mine, process, transport, 99% of the stuff we run through this system is trashed within 6 months. Now, how can we run a planet with that level of materials throughput? It wasn't always like this. The average U.S. person now consumes twice as much as they did 50 years ago. Ask your grandma. In her day, stewardship and resourcefulness and thrift were valued. So how did this happen? Well, it didn't just happen. It was designed. Shortly after World War II, these guys were figuring out how to ramp up the economy. Council of Economic Advisors chairman said that the American economy's ultimate purpose is to produce more consumer goods. More consumer goods? Our ultimate purpose? Not provide health care or education or safe transportation or sustainability or justice? Consumer goods? How did they get us to jump on board this program so enthusiastically? Well, 2 of their most effective strategies are planned obsolescence and perceived obsolescence. Planned obsolescence is another word for designed for the dump. It means they actually make stuff to be useless as quickly as possible, so we'll chuck it and buy a new one. It's obvious with things like plastic bags and coffee cups, but now it's even big stuff. Mops, DVDs, cameras, barbecues even, everything. Even computers. Wrong, our furniture is wrong, our car is wrong, we are wrong, but it can all be made right if we just go shopping. Media also helps by hiding all of this and all of this. So the only part of the materials economy we see is the shopping. The extraction, production, and disposal all happens outside of our field of vision. So in the U.S., we have more stuff than ever before, but polls show that our national happiness is actually declining. Our national happiness peaked in the 1950s, the same time that this consumption mania exploded. Interesting coincidence. I think I know why. We have more stuff, but we have less time for the things that really make us happy. Friends, family, leisure time. We're working harder than ever. Some analysts say we have less leisure time than any time since feudal society. And do you know what the 2 main activities are that we do with the scant leisure time we have? Watch TV and shop. In the U.S., we spend 3 to 4 times as many hours shopping as our counterparts in Europe do. So we're in this ridiculous situation where we go to work, maybe 2 jobs even, and we come home and we're exhausted. So we plop down on our new couch and watch TV, and the commercials tell us you suck. So you got to go to the mall to buy something to feel better, and then you got to go to work more to pay for the stuff you just bought. So you come home and you're more tired, so you sit down and you watch more TV, and it tells you to go to the mall again, and we're on this crazy work, watch, spend treadmill, and we could just stop. So in the end, what happens to all the stuff we buy anyway? At this rate of consumption, it can't fit into our houses, even though the average house size has doubled in this country since the 1970s. It all goes out in the garbage. And that brings us to disposal. This is the part of the materials economy we all know the most because we have to haul the junk out to the curb ourselves. Each of us in the United States makes 4.5 pounds of garbage a day. That's twice what we each made 30 years ago. All of this garbage either gets dumped in a landfill, which is just a big hole in the ground, or if you're really unlucky, first it's burned in an incinerator and then dumped in the landfill. Either way, incinerators are the #1 source of dioxin. That means that we could stop the #1 source of the most toxic man-made substance known just by stopping burning the trash. We could stop it today. Now, some companies don't want to deal with building landfills and incinerators here, so they just export the disposal too.
We'll talk about that exporting of the disposal, that last point that she makes in just a second. But the idea that she presents here is that the propaganda is that we need to continue to shop, right? We need more jobs, we need more income so that we can buy more stuff because that's what value, or that's where our individual value is centered within our consumer culture. That's where we get a sense of who we are. But she also examines this notion of, are we happier now than we used to be as we're working multiple jobs, as we're, on this consumer wheel, or are we less happy because we have less time to deal with the things that matter most to us, our friends and our family and the relationships that we're able to have. And she also indicates this idea that gets back to the original or the first scenario, or the scenario that I gave you about the boat, right, where we only have so many resources on there. So the question is, who gets access to these resources? Should people in the wealthier countries have better access to the resources than those who are in developing or majority world countries? Thinking about that, how much we consume and whether this is sustainable, here's a quote to think about, right? A child born in the United States will create 13 times as much ecological damage over the course of his or her lifetime than a child born in Brazil, and the average American will drain as many resources as 35 natives of India and consume 53 times more goods and services than someone from China. With less than 5% of the world's population, the U.S. uses 1/3 of the world's paper, 1/4 of the world's oil, 23% of the coal, 27% of the aluminum, and 19% of the copper. Our per capita use of energy, metals, minerals, forest products, fish, grains, meat, and even fresh water dwarfs that of people living in the developing world. And so as we think about the life raft that we're on, is there more space for others to be able to utilize these resources rather than just take up the resources for ourselves? Thinking about, all of the efforts all of the propaganda to get us to go out and to buy and to consume and to be good citizens by doing this, and to see that social value and the social norms that we create centered on shopping. The other side of this is, well, what do we do with all of the garbage that we have, right? When our cell phones get outdated after a year or two, they can no longer work, or we at least think that they can no longer work, or our clothing, once, it's out of season, it's no longer in style anymore, or it starts to, get worn out, what do we do with it? And the landfills in the United States are becoming filled up, and so what do? We start to export our trash to these developing countries. And so in a weird twist of irony, we go to these developing countries, we use the resources, we pay them cheap labor so that we can get a $5 radio or whatever the case may be, and then we use the product, and on average 6 months later, right, it ends up within the trash. And then the question is, well, what do we do with it? We ship it back to the place that we originally got it from. And so then the question is, was there a moral, right, problem with this? Is this an immoral system that we're developing? Children here are collecting water bottles among the garbage washed ashore in Manila Bay. According to the United Nations Environmental Program, at current rates of pollution, there will likely be more plastic in the sea than fish by 2050. And so thinking about the trash that we're continually consuming, how are we affecting the planet, right? And I think that some that I've taught similar ideas to over the years in the church, they take this idea of, well, we're supposed to utilize the resources that God has given us, and we're just utilizing the resources that we're given. And anyway, it doesn't matter because the earth is going to be renewed and receive its paradisical glory. And I wonder if that is a dismissive attitude, right? Should we, as we are given stewardship, as according to the scriptures, given stewardship over the resources that we have, are we becoming good stewards? Or are we developing a system that not only is unsustainable, it's making us not happy, it's making us divided, it makes us feel empty and alone, and it's also trashing, the resources that God has given us. This is a dumping site in Manila where now we're dumping our garbage on these countries once again. And it's not, just to give you some insight to this, it's not as though we take these big ships with garbage and we just dump it on their beach and like in the middle of the night and we sneak away, right? We're paying them to do that. We're saying, here's our trash, right? But again, are we exploiting people who are impoverished in order to sustain our way of life, right? Here's some children swimming in the sea of garbage in Indonesia that is polluting our waterways. And part of the pollution here is as these ships go by, right, constantly throughout the Pacific and the Atlantic and, transporting goods and resources, there is a tendency to have some of their garbage dropped, and sometimes it's used as a dumping ground, right? This is a polluted river in Jakarta, another element of our civilization. And again, the main idea of the propaganda is that we are not supposed to know about this. That companies don't want us to see this because they don't want us thinking, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't be buying this product. Maybe I should think before I purchase. What they mainly want us to do is to keep buying, right? So they keep all of this behind the curtain, behind the veil, so we don't know about it, right? This is just some pollution that has come from the ocean that's become so polluted that's in Honduras that just was washed up ashore. This is the plastic island in the Pacific that's as large as the state of Texas, just kind of swimming around. And then the question is, what's the morality within this? And so this lecture is getting us to understand some of the complexities of some of the issues that we're going to be facing for years to come, and we have to understand what's happening and sift through the propaganda of it if we're going to actually understand the actual issue that's at play here, so that we can understand how to solve it. Because if we don't understand what the problem is and that's kept from us, then we'll never know how to, what's the best steps in moving forward.